بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Firstly, we hope everyone is safe and is safe during this pandemic. We know it's difficult, but inshallah, things will get better and we will reemerge wiser. And inshallah, we will, through this experience, inshallah, we will tread our steps more gently upon the earth. And this webinar basically is this between Imana and Isna. It's a collaboration. This webinar is as I mentioned, a collaboration of Isna with Imana, which is the Islamic Medical Association of North America. And Isna supports the green initiatives of Imana. And we also, in addition, encourage all communities to form a green initiative team specific to their community needs and faith. So our topic today is environmental disharmony on the rise, human activity, health, zoonotic diseases. And speaking today is myself. My name is Uzma Mirza, and Dr. Mariam Hussain, who is the Vice President of Imana. And a little bit about myself. I am a registered and licensed architect. I am also an Isna Green Initiative team, one of its co-founders. I am LEED certified, which is with the US Green Building Council. And I am the founder and president of the Pen and Inkpot Foundation. And Dr. Mariam Hussain is a physician. She is a fellow of hematology and oncology at Ohio State University's James Comprehensive Cancer Center. She's also the Imana's vice president, and she's the founder of Science Jama. And we're excited, Dr. Hussain, you're with us, and listen to your talk shortly. But before we begin, I'd just like to talk about ISNA, it's Green Initiative Platform, and before we begin our topic. So Islam has ordained us to be the stewards, vicegerents, the caretakers, protectors of this planet, protectors of the Imana, the trust given to us. Hence, Muslims need to be an eco-friendly community. The Islamic Society of North America's platform, therefore, sees our responsibility, Muslims' responsibility, the Ummah, is to take care of our environment. We were given the message. Everything in creation is a trust or an amana from Allah to us humans as khalifas, stewards or vicegerents of Allah. On earth, therefore, humans have been assigned to establish a just social order, a peaceful society, and civilization on earth. The question is, have we fulfilled this trust? Are we fulfilling this? Are we doing our role and our duty as vicegerents with compassion, with care? Islamic, and therefore, if you notice some of the quotes from the Quran, that God has made us successors, and the Prophet ﷺ said, "The earth has been made sacred and pure, and a mosque for me." So the Green Initiative, ISNA's Green Initiative platform are about 5. It is a work in progress, but we have strategies and goals, of which education and stewardship of the environment, in which, for example, at the annual ISNA convention, we had a main session dealing specifically with the environment. And in the past, we've had breakout sessions dealing with the environment as well. We have our Horizons magazine, in which we have various articles a few times a year that specifically deal with the environment, alhamdulillah. And we have one upcoming. We also have and encourage green khutbahs. We also have the next strategies and goals is developing guidance for eco-friendly practice, which is, for example, a green rating rubric that you will see upcoming in the Green Ramadan campaign. And this green rating rubric can be used for your home as well as your masjid. And as you know, during this pandemic, our homes are our masjids. Also, the Green Masjid booklet, which shows practical steps through categories of like water, energy, materials recycling and waste management as practical steps of how your home or masjid can be green. We also have a Green Ramadan campaign, which I will briefly talk about shortly at the end of this slide presentation. We also have green awards and certificates, and as part of the certificates and your participation in the Greening Ramadan campaign, we plant trees, reflecting your participation as a gift from Isna, courtesy of the Pending Bud Foundation. We also have green advocacy. In other words, we support various statements and declarations, observances. For example, the repealing of the Clean Energy Plan, the 2015 Islamic Declaration on global climate change, and supporting statements by IPL and other organizations as the Global Muslim Climate Network. We do collaborations and webinars, as this one, with Imana, the Islamic Medical Association. And we are planning to do more, as I'll be talking about at the end of this presentation. We have done various ones in the past. We have collaborated with Green Faith Circle of Southern New Jersey, with the Islamic Center of South Jersey, with Mana, and we've actually also collaborated with something that we are very proud of. It's the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. So we have a booklet, and it was debuted at this year 2020 or last year 2020 Isna convention, and it was the first Energy Star booklet collaborated with the EPA for Muslim communities, alhamdulillah. And it is currently available for your use, for your masjids, for your schools, and your Islamic centers. And then we have Isna Green webinars. Webinars on the Green Ramadan campaign, which we will be doing shortly, inshallah, as Ramadan is approaching. We will also be doing it for Earth Day, aligning it with Earth Day, with Water Week, with Climate Change Week as well, Action Week as well. So these are the 5 strategies and goals that ISNA is embarking on. So today, environmental disharmony on the rise, the topic of this evening, human activity, health, zoonotic diseases. The Prophet said, the world is beautiful and verdant, and verily God the Exalted made you stewards, khalifas, and he sees how you equip yourselves. So today we have a widespread unsustainable human activity and the proximity with wildlife ecosystems exacerbated by wildlife trafficking, natural habitat destruction, climate change, clear cutting of forests to make way for farm and grazing land for livestock, which have become a major cause of habitat destruction. This is giving rise to zoonotic diseases. And what are zoonotic diseases? They are wildlife to human outbreaks, as SARS, AIDS, West Nile's monkeypox, to influenzas, and of course today's pandemic, COVID-19. And this is leaving scientists asking the big question, like, when will be the big one? We don't know. It could be tomorrow. So what is the solution? A revival of human stewardship. It is pressing in order to counter the unsustainable human activity to preserve Earth's other communities. We are one of the many communities Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told, as I mentioned, and as a first preventive measure that counterbalances such unsustainable activities, unsustainable human activities, which includes racism, bigotry, lack of diversity, and basically hurtful or polluting others type of actions upon ourselves, upon others, and our universe. So the environmental disharmony on the rise. What does the Quran say? We have been given a Imana. We established a covenant. A covenant is an agreement, and that covenant between God and humanity was a trust, and that is the Imana. And all creation shuddered. The mountains, trees, all animals said, no way, we don't want to do this. Of course, humans said, we'll do it. Of course, they accepted it, and it has a heavy burden. This duty has a heavy burden, which requires the establishment of justice in society. Imana defines man's rights and responsibilities in relation to all the other humans in his environment and the rest of God's creation. Everything given to us is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's a kind of Imana trust that we should manage. Now, the first Imana was to be a Khalifa. So to maintain this trust, we were given to be the successors, Khalifa upon the earth, where some he gave more, some he gave differently. It's not more or less, but it's different. Some were poor, some had wealth, but you'll be answering for every little atom for what was given to us, including our bodies, our eyes, what we do, what we say, and how we act. It gives it's a reminder of us, sort of, it sends a chill, as it is a reminder when you read this, that we are not fulfilling our stewardship. Because Imana, as I mentioned, it's accountability, it's honesty, transparency, and perfection of actions, which are all part of its broad meaning of Imana. And the concept of Imana makes human life more meaningful, because this puts man squarely charged with creating a moral social order. And thus it provides him the opportunity to demonstrate his ability to be Allah's vicegerent on earth. First Imana, as I mentioned, was to be Khalifa, the vicegerent. And there are two aspects of this. One is we have been given a mental faculty and a rational power to judge between right and wrong, good and evil. Secondly, we have free will in order to act upon this good and evil and choose, or to believe in God or not God. We have the choice. So we have a choice to be stewards as we follow this the guidance in the worship of Allah. And in this Imana, the other attributes and ingredients as part of this Imana with the role of vicegerence as Khalifa is the Mizan, the firmament he raised high, the balance of justice. Our bodies, our souls, our hands, our ears, intellect, provisions, our clothing, our homes are all blessings, favors, and bounties of Allah that have been given to us as Imana, as a trust. And when something is given to you as a trust, you need to return it the way it was. Just like when you rent something, do you not have to return it, your apartment or a car? You lease it the way it was. So we will be questioned about how we treated and what we did. But alhamdulillah, Allah is merciful. That mercy can overwhelm us and forgive us for much. That is why we will be questioned about all the bounties that were given to us. So Imana is regulated by nature of balance, maintaining diversity and sustain the resources. And hence we were entrusted with as stewards of this Imana as vicegerents in Allah's care, and not its conquerors. So the color of Mizan, ironically, is interesting. The color of God. Then who can color better than God? The light spectrum, the visible light, the center of it of balance is green. Isn't that ironic? It's some food for thought. That happens to be green, and it is the green movement that we are looking at the concept of balance. Something to think about. Preserve diversity, dignity. We are one creature of many creatures and communities that Allah has created. And when you preserve diversity of people, you give them dignity. That includes racism. That includes bigotry. Treating people correctly. You maintain the dignity that Allah gave, not what you gave. Sustain resources. The earth has these resources, which includes resources we can extract. Do not waste. This cultivates charity. So if care and stewardship is neglected, what happens? It's our consequences of our misdeeds. Therefore, what our hands make, we will see its consequences of not listening or understanding what it means to be a steward. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, oh, you believe, do not betray it, God and his messenger, and knowingly violate the trust. So environmental disharmony, therefore, if care and stewardship is neglected, it will equal environmental disharmony on the rise. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Mariam Hussain, who will further expand on this so important, pressing environmental issue of stewardship. Dr. Mariam.
All right, thank you so much, Isma. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Really honored to be here, and thank you to Isma and the Isna Green Initiative for the invitation. So I'm Mariam Hussain, and I'm the Vice President of Imana. And here's the vision and mission for our organization. So our main vision is providing global medical relief around the world, especially in response to disaster situations. So you may ask, well, why is a medical organization focused on climate change? And it's one of those things where after conversations with multiple people, we had a climate change consultant as well. And the conversation came to the fact that a lot of the work that we would do in response after a hurricane, cyclones, after natural disasters, that we were in fact responding to the effects of climate change. To these different parts of the world, that people were suffering because of these natural disasters caused by climate change. And the work that we've been doing since 2003 has been in response to that. So it made perfect sense for us as healthcare professionals to want to focus on this very important issue affecting the planet and all our communities right now. So here's a basic outline for my conversation that we'll be having. And so just so that everyone has an idea, where we're kind of going with this, what does harmony exactly mean? How does it exist in nature on our planet? Why should we care? And then what are some solutions that we can focus on? So please, if you have any questions, write it in the chat and we're more than happy to answer it after the conversation. So starting off with the first point, so harmony. And Uzma brought it up very well, this environmental disharmony that's happening. But you can't have disharmony without having first had harmony. And so what does that mean? And I'm sure as many of you may remember from grade school and learning about the water cycle and precipitation and all that there is a natural cycle that exists but not just on the earth, but in the atmosphere and the soil and back around again. And so when you kind of take a broader view out, you realize that it is so much more expansive than what we've learned about just one cycle happening, and that how we're able to get clouds and rain, and then condensation and precipitation and all that. And so you see that there's a very intricate relationship, and a scientifically proven relationship actually between all these elements and environments on the planet. You have the atmosphere, soil, the oceans, water, and then biodiversity that includes animals and humans as well too. So as any sort of system exists within itself, that if you have any excess or deficiencies on one end, you can disrupt the whole system. And when you think about the earth itself, it's a very self-sustaining system. We don't import or export with other planets as of yet. We don't, the main interactions that we have are with a star, right? With our sun and sunlight. But otherwise, the earth has to rely on itself. And of course, relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in the sense of, the physical sense that we can see, it is a self-sustaining machine. And so this harmony didn't just happen, just one day, right? The Quran talks about, that Allah, that the universe and earth were created in a matter of days. But even in itself, our concept of days is not what we think, right? That Allah's concept of days, that, just a 24-hour period. So this sort of, whatever science you choose to believe in and evolution and all of that this harmony took thousands of years, millennia, billions of years to be created. And we are just one aspect of it. And so this quote that I really like is from Chief Sealth, who actually, his name or the city of Seattle is named after him, actually, that humankind didn't create this web of life, right? But we are one thread in it. And so if it were not for the grace of Allah and, this all powerful creator, that we would not have this balance as it exists. And so you can see that these concepts exist not just in the Quran and in our tradition, but also these indigenous cultures as well too, who have been here longer than us. Now that's harmony in general, thinking about it from a very planetary view. So looking at it from on the ground view. So where do animals fit in? Because when humankind came onto the planet, animals were already in existence at that time. So animal and plant life also share a very intricate relationship when you kind of narrow it down as well too. And it's very interdependent. We've learned about food chains, on Earth, on the sea, and one animal or a planet, or a plant element in this system gives rise to another, as you can see in this, cyclical pattern. But what the nice part about it is that cycle then repeats on itself, right? And the system is created all over again. That self-sustaining, self-renewing mechanisms that exist on this planet. And so when you learned about food chains, it's very simple, go from plant to, one animal to the next animal to an apex predator. And then when they decompose, you go, but the cycle renews itself. But what we realize a lot too is that there is actually multiple food chains that exist, not just one. And that is considered a food web. That is one way to term it. And so you can see as well too in these bottom two pictures as well that it's not as simple that if you take one animal out or if you help one animal out or whatever the case may be, that everything is so unbelievably interdependent on each other. And messing with one animal species can have profound impacts, not just on the animals that may rely on that one particular animal, but also looking backwards in terms of the soil, in terms of the fungi, all of that stuff that could help to sustain that one animal. And so again, we start seeing more so that harmony isn't just about having one linear relationship with everyone, but about this web that exists. And so the important part about this as well too is that I want to just really drive the point home is that this harmony and this balance existed before humans came onto the scene. And again, not trying to have a conversation about evolution or anything like that, but plant life, soil life, animal life, that was there before Adam and Hawa came onto the planet. And so we are one aspect, right, of this web, of this interconnectedness that exists between everything on this planet. And so with that, it's one of those things where it's not that we shouldn't be actors, right? That we should be a part of the equation because we are. And it's not a bad thing if we choose to, eat whatever we choose to eat or having a home or whatever that may be. But we must understand that we are part of this balance that exists. And so we have to be fair players, to point to Sister Uzma's point about having, being khalifas and having this responsibility that we can live in an eco-friendly type manner, right? Where we, on the right-hand side, where we are part of the equation. Or we can act as if we're at the top of the equation, where everything serves us and that there is no balance, but that it's a hierarchy and that we are at the top of it. So unfortunately, I'll guess I'll leave it up to you guys to see which part are we. Are we the more eco-conscious species, or are we the more ego-minded species in terms of what we do and how we think about plant life, animal life, and just how much of a part of our daily lives is that real consciousness? So human activity is having a very profound impact on this natural world, on this natural balance. I know that there are a lot of, this can be a very political conversation, can have very different views about it, but this is a concept that over 98% of scientists who study all different aspects of this natural balance are in agreement that our activity as humans is causing a disruption in the harmony that exists on planet Earth. So what has that excess consumption led to? more air pollution that we can see. You can't drive on a highway now without seeing a plume, a very familiar, unfortunately familiar plume of smoke and carbon emissions. Ocean pollution. We see, you might hear those random stories about how turtles are having spoons stuck up their noses, plastic spoons stuck up their noses, or how you don't just see natural debris in the ocean, but it's actually human trash and waste that's piling up. Oil drilling and spills. BP's one a few years back was probably one of the more prominent ones on the news, and how it just wasn't stopping. And then also deforestation is a huge matter as well too. We heard, unfortunately, just the devastation that was happening in Australia, and then now closer to home in California, that continues to happen, and it has devastated human, not just homes for humans, but also animals as well too. So delving a little bit more into detail about this, just again to help you get a better understanding of what is happening. That when we talk about air pollution, so even though we had the Clean Air Act and there's been a lot of work done to try to decrease air pollution, unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of challenges as it relates to people who either live close to these areas or people who are in more urban centers and more clustered together where they have more exposure to this smoke and these carbon emissions. So what exactly is in air pollution or in a carbon emission? The main thing that is of concern and that you might hear when you read about this is PM 2.5 or particulate matter 2.5 nanometers. And so this small amount of particulate emission, so these very fine matter that comes from these natural elements that are released in smoke and carbon emissions, are directly related to lung cancer, to asthma, to COPD exacerbations. Some of you may know people who have asthma, especially little kids, or some people may have lung cancer. But a lot of these studies were done in China, in Beijing, because of the large population density. And unfortunately, it's, again, a direct link that has been found. One of the component organizations of the NIH, the National Institutes for Environmental Health and Science, they have, through different survey data and research data, that about 3.4 million people die prematurely from this fine particulate matter pollution and ozone pollution as well too. That's preventable if we just didn't have as much air pollution. 3.4 million people a year. When you look at ocean pollution, some of the things that you may hear about are acidification. So when there's a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, again, that natural harmony that exists between condensation, between the oceans and the atmosphere, that carbon dioxide is actually an acid when it goes through chemical reactions and ends up in water and in the ocean. So that acidification is harming coral reefs. And so a lot of people like snorkeling and seeing that, you'll see coral bleaching is something that you may hear about. You can also, because of that excess carbon as well too, and because of pollution and all that, you could, scientists are also seeing low oxygen levels in the water. So we rely on oxygen, but so do animals in the ocean. It's just that it's a different form of oxygen. We breathe it in air, they are breathing it underwater. And so when you have low oxygen that way, you have these animals starving for oxygen as well too. And there's also a phenomenon called ocean dead zones. And this is thought to be related to agricultural runoff. So a lot of fertilizer that ends up getting, when you don't have a lot of regulation about waste, it ends up in the ocean, or at least it might end up in a river, which are, again, that harmony where everything is connected, rivers connecting to lakes, connecting to oceans. And then you get this runoff pollution that happens. With oil drills and spills, it's pretty self-explanatory in terms of that, just the pollution. You see some of those commercials about Dawn soap where they're trying to clean off ducks and different marine life as well too. And so you can interpret, you can guess the devastating impacts that has on wildlife. And then last thing I wanted to focus on was deforestation. So if you think about it, that water, takes up about 2/3, if not more, of the planet. Forests actually cover about 31% of the planet, so a third of it. And when you have rainforests, you hear a lot about the Amazon. Indonesia has a lot of rainforests as well too. Even though they're a smaller part of, compared to the oceans, they are an enormous carbon sink. And what does that mean? Is that they actually help to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. So again, that harmony that exists, the Earth being the self-renewing system, even though it may produce carbon emissions, with natural wildfires that may happen, it's able to suck it back in, right? With their trees. And not only that, but these rainforests also are home to a significant amount of biodiversity, that all these different animal species that naturally exist and live in harmony with one another. That's what these rainforests are able to provide. They help us to be able to live on this planet, and not just us, but animals, plants, everything. But unfortunately, the biggest issue that's happening right now with these forests is deforestation. And it's estimated at sometimes that thousands of square miles of forest land are being torn down, burned down a day. If not a day, or yeah, actually every day. I had to do a double take, and I did a double take when I was doing research on this too, that it was happening thousands of square miles a day. So that's how plentiful the rainforest is, that it still is existing, but a significant amount of it has been just devastated. And why is this happening? For at least the Amazon, 65 to 70% of the deforestation that happens is to make way for cattle ranching, so beef production. 65 to 70% is the reason of, again, for in terms of why these trees are being broken down, is for us to eat meat, not because we're dependent on it, but because we want it. And so burning forests also lead to increase in greenhouse emissions. About 25% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions are from deforestation, 25%. And so, again, there are a lot of things to talk about when it comes to climate change, but for the purposes of this talk, it's going to be about our relationship and animal life. And again, going back to the mandate that Sister Rosamond was talking about from our creator as well too. So this ultimately leads you can see just the disharmony that is created, right, by our excess human activity, that this egocentric model has led to a lot of disruptions in natural ecosystems and natural webs of life. So, but why should humans care, right? I'm telling you what's happening, but why should you ultimately care? So a lot of it comes down to, well, what do humans need to survive, right? So we need food, right? We need, and in the form of that is agriculture. If you want to go to the next slide. And so we've been doing, when you look back again at fossil records for humans, how long we've been here, how we used to be nomads, right? And you would just hunt for food the same way you think about a wolf hunting for food, and you just go from place to place to do that. When we really started to settle down was about 15,000 years ago, where we would settle around water sources like lakes or deltas. And to stay there, you needed to have a sustainable source of food. And so that's how agriculture came about. And so it's not a new phenomenon that we're just doing, just in the last 100 years or so. We've been doing this for a long time. And we were doing it in a way that was in harmony with the natural world. There weren't as many people back then, obviously, but we were able to, have our animals out in the open, that they were able to graze, as you can see in some of these pictures here, naturally. They were eating off of the land, and their waste would also serve as fertilizer to be able to help cultivate the land better too. Our practices of cultivating food were also healthier, that we focused on what made the soil healthy. How were the animals healthy with that as well too, so that we had healthier food, and then also giving it back to the animals as well too. And working within the natural plant life as well too, not tearing down as many forests, using what arable land was already there, or land that's able to be cultivated for food. We weren't tearing things down as much. But unfortunately, things have started to shift, and not started to, but they have shifted for a long time, where now you can see that these are present day farms. not out on pastures, but in buildings that we had to create, and that animal and livestock are very close in proximity to each other. This does not look like a normal habitat to you if you may think about it. This is actually where our food comes from now. And so with this as well too, is that where this shift is not only causing an increase in production, but also an increase in abuse of these animals as well too, and just a very unnatural way of managing livestock with the sole purpose of having maximum meat production. So globally, since 2012, and what it's projected up until 2030, so about 9 years from now, is that it's projected that our increase for the demand of animal sources of food will increase by 35% in just about 18 years. And it's projected to increase by up to 50%. So global demand increased by half by 2050. So just in a little less than 30 years. We currently have about 7 to 8 billion people on the planet right now. There are expectations that will go up to 8.6 billion by 2030, so in about 9 years. Then there are also projections that will go up to 9.8 billion by 2050. That's a lot of people to feed. That's a lot of humans. And of course, people should be fed, but we have to understand too that how is this balance being maintained? With the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people were stuck at home, unfortunately. And there was a analysis group that saw in 2020 that chicken was the most preferred meat by the American people, at least in our country. So we are, there was a quote that we are a chicken nation. And so the maintenance of this livestock to produce it in such a manner that can sustain 300 million people in America, but also 7 to 8 billion people around the world is also unfortunately causing a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So not only are we just doing abuse to animals and livestock and trying to just focus on maximum meat production, but we're also contributing to climate change as well too. So in terms of global GDP, so global domestic product, and what our global economy is based on, 40% of it, so almost half, 40% of it is based on agriculture. Our economy is based on the exchange of meat and animal sources of food, 40%. So you can see that there is an economic reason and also a survival reason that we do need meat production, but how much meat production is necessary for our survival. You see a lot of fast food businesses that have popped up around urban centers as well too, but and then when you think about fast food joints too are a major buyer of this meat production, how it's also contributing to poor health of humans as well too. That statistically as well too, and a bunch of studies as well, that people who rely on fast food sources for diet have very poor health outcomes as well too. So that's another aspect of it as well. In addition to the way that we are doing our agriculture nowadays is actually leading to land degradation, is what it's called, or soil degradation as well too. That the current way that we deal with growing animals, and instead of being it outside, mainly focusing on inside as well too. And when we do try to do it outside for that cattle ranching, for example, in the Amazon, the soil practices that we're doing are not healthy. They are not contributing to having the soil be replenished every year so that it can produce as much yield as it did the year before. And this isn't just something that's happening in the States, it's happening throughout the world as well too. And so that is also then leading to more deforestation because we need more natural, better soil. So we have to tear down more forests to be able to get that because our current practices aren't making sense. So again, going back to this harmony aspect of things, what we're doing to try to feed people is based a lot on want instead of need. And the way that we're doing it is causing abuse to animals, unhealthy conditions for animals, It's causing bad soil practices where it's causing us to have to do more deforestation, and then which ultimately leads to more greenhouse gas emissions as well too. The other thing as well on top of that is that a majority of deforestation, at least in the Amazon, is related to cattle ranching, is that you hear a lot about cow emissions, right? So around, and methane is something else that you hear a lot about too, that cows are contributing a lot in and of themselves, are contributing a lot to greenhouse gas emissions. One study that came out found that about 14.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions that come from the entire world are related to the livestock sector. So that includes cows, chickens, all that, and not just emissions that may come from cows, but just maintenance of these farm animals. And so the other thing to keep in mind as well too is that methane and another element called nitrous oxide, which is involved in fertilizers to and try to improve soil health as much as we can, or try to make it as productive of a yield as possible, even though we're doing poor soil practices, are significantly have a higher impact on greenhouse gas greenhouse effect than carbon dioxide. So it's not just carbon dioxide, but it's other gases involved as well too. So when we go back to the livestock focus in terms of that, when you have these animals in very cramped quarters, close together, like you saw on the last slide, this close proximity, which again is not a natural phenomenon that animals or humans should necessarily be involved in, you can lead to more disease because you don't, it's harder to clean things up. It's harder to have natural environments where have even though there may be some soil, soil contamination, some stool that animals may release, it's easier to maintain a cleaner environment and a more open natural environment out on the actual grass and out in an open sky than you would in a building. Along with that as well, so animals then are also, so because they're forced to be in close quarters, you can have viruses, pathogens, bacteria, things like that pass a lot more easily between animals than you would in under normal environments. So what does that mean? So even though animals may develop viruses, but why should that happen? Worry about humans. The way that viruses work with that too is that if you have such poor conditions where you are having stool everywhere, not clean environment, you can actually end up, and then you have just these close quarters, is that viruses can jump back and forth between different animals. And as they jump back and forth, they mutate along the way. And the dirtier the conditions, the closer cramped quarters, it mutates more. And it can mutate to the point that it can go from the animal, and actually that mutated form of the virus ends up causing a problem in humans. And that's what the concept of zoonotic diseases is, that how you get diseases go from animals to people and vice versa with that as well too. And so the biggest thing, unfortunately, that we're seeing from this now is COVID-19. But it's not the first one that happened. And so in the last picture, you saw this open market, right? And these are the markets that they talk about, these wet markets that exist in China, and not just China, but in multiple places around the world. And it's not a new phenomenon either, is that these are kind of like farmers markets, if you kind of think about it the way we have here in the States, but regulations are different and different foods are offered as well. The problem too is that you'll have fresh fruits, but then you'll have, let's say, seafood that should be in ice, but then given if there's like warm global temperatures going on, they're not cold anymore. And you'll have a lot of water that's just sitting around from ice that is melted. That standing water can also be a source of infection as well too, and just pathogens growing and viruses. And so even though these markets are actually a very important source of livelihood for these lower income people around the world, it's unfortunately having unintended consequences. And so it's not necessarily that these people are intentionally trying to cause harm or to cause problems, But when you have, and that's for another conversation about our global economic structure, unfortunately, you're having unintended consequences where environments are being created that are dirtier and are causing more virus spread between animals that eventually go to humans. And so we've seen this happen as early as HIV, which actually came from a monkey. You're seeing it more recently with Ebola, that when we had that about 5-6 years ago, coming from bats. You had the MERS, the Middle Eastern respiratory virus, which was actually as a result of contact with camels. And then the SARS virus as well, that was also based out of China as well too, that these were all theorized to happen from close contact with animals. That is not a natural phenomenon. And a lot of these markets also have very exotic animals that, again, we don't normally have contact with, such as snakes, crocodiles, and different animals like that. And unfortunately, you're seeing a rise, like Sister Rosamund mentioned as well too, a rise of these zoonotic diseases. The thing is not so much, and the one thing I also wanted you guys to also think about as well too, that it's not so much that we're seeing a bunch of different viruses that have happened, but also the proximity and the close timeline that it's happening in. Is that HIV was back in the 90s, and now in 2021 is that we're seeing a lot more viruses, pandemics happen in a lot shorter frequency and closer time period to one another. So that's a lot of real heavy stuff, and it can seem very depressing and it's not, always happy news, of course, but what are some solutions, right? So there is a way out of this. And one of the ways to think about solutions is this One Health model. So this is something that came out of the CDC as well, and also the WHO and a bunch of these international health organizations, where what can we do to help reconnect humans who are natural species that should be on this planet? How do we reconnect us with the natural world and along with all its inhabitants? Is that health is not just how humans are doing, but how are animals doing, and plants and soil health, because ultimately their health impacts our health. And if they're protected, we're protected. So what are some things that you can do? I know we're coming up here close to the 1 hour mark. So on the next slide, there's a bunch of things that you can do, actually. And so some of that, just even getting informed, right? We recently rejoined the WHO, which has a abundance of information about how human health is impacting the health around the planet. How the CDC is also a very reliable source of information as well too. In terms of things that you can do personally, lowering consumption. I know that culturally, eating meat is obviously something that we do, but maybe focusing on, instead of having it every day of the week, taking one day off. Or also figuring out, where's your meat coming from? Is it coming from local places, or is it coming from imported places outside of the country? That may not have such the best practices for cattle, for chicken, etc. And the other concept to drive home, and Dr. Madiha Sayed talks about this a lot, talks a lot about this as well, is that it's not just about halal, so eating what is permissible or what is lawful, but it's also about eating what is tayyib, so what is pure, what is good. And that a lot of our food may be halal, but how were the animals treated, right? Where did your food come from? And what sort of impact are your eating practices having on the world around you? And that if it may be good to you, is it good to everyone else? And if it's not, then is it really tayyib, right? And I'll leave that to the scholars there as well. But planting trees, like Sister Rosamund mentioned, palm oil, that's another very important reason why deforestation is happening, is that a lot of the foods, if you go just into your kitchen and look in your pantry to see what foods you have, I want you to see how many don't have palm oil in them. It's unfortunately become a very common ingredient in a lot of food, and it comes from rainforests and forests. And to maintain the demand for the foods that we want, again, want, not need, but want, we're destroying these forests around the world to maintain that economic model. decreasing waste as well too, and just, you know, advocating for improving healthcare. Again, even though you want you to have good healthcare, which is very important, if your environment around you is very unhealthy, are you going to be healthy? So some things to think about there. However, one of the problems that any sort of social scientist runs into, and whenever you want to make change, is that everybody can maybe accept that, yes, you know, something wrong is happening, right? There is some sort of imbalance happening. And who wants change? Everybody wants change. Everybody wants things to change. But who's willing to actually change? And so this is not meant to be, you know, dogmatic or indoctrinating to tell you how you should live your life, but just to help you think about what are you willing to do, right? And so it goes back to a previous slide in this conversation, is this message from our creator, but also a message of hope, is that we have the ability to turn this around. And a lot of this imbalance that is happening is because of things that we want and not need, and economic models that were set up because of that want and not need. And so the same way they were created, they can be changed, because it wasn't something natural that was created, and it wasn't, you know, the God didn't come down and make these decisions. We made these decisions. And so as Khalifa, as a trust that he has given to us and that we have taken, it's just a hopeful reminder that we can turn things around if we want to. So, and the other thing I just want to let people know as well too is that the work has already been started. So you don't have to start from scratch. Thanks to Isna and you know, some of the things that I've come across as well too, we've been able to find a lot of green initiatives that are happening by Muslims, and not just in the Muslim world, but also here in the States as well too. Individual masjids are working on things, individual organizations like Isna and Imana, and the fact that we're working together too. Sister Rosema's Pen and Inkpot Foundation as well. And so a bunch of people are already doing a lot of good work. And we just need more people to do that work, inshallah, to turn this stuff around. And the very last thing I'd like to leave you with is hope, but also reality. And so Gavi, which is the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations, they wrote an article recently about why we're seeing more pandemics, and something that I had said just a little while ago, that we're seeing them a lot more frequently now, is that we have to be aware of what these factors are so that we can deal with it. Because if we don't name the problem, we won't know how to fix it. And so what's contributing is global travel, urbanization or increased urbanization, where people are moving from suburbs or into cities, or where cities are just getting larger. Climate change in and of itself, like we talked about with deforestation and greenhouse gas emissions, increased human and animal contact. So this increase in zoonotic diseases, and this increase in this abnormal, unnatural interaction with the natural world. And then also health worker shortages, where we're not investing in all parts of the world in our healthcare systems, but investing in other things. And so again, there is a lot of reality that's happening, and a lot of not good news that is happening, but there's also a lot of hope that we can definitely turn this thing around. If enough of us, and I hope all of us, but if enough of us work on this together, inshallah. So I really appreciate your time. Again, please feel free to ask any questions. Thank you again to Sister Uzma and Isna, and it's been a pleasure to be here tonight, and thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you, Dr. Mariam Hussein. That was amazing. It basically shed light on the problem at hand. Our vicegerency is pressing. Thank you so much. And you backed it up with data, and that data is available on Google. It's available. Obviously, you have to find the right sources. Sometimes Google can give faulty information. But this is not political. This is not bipartisan. This is real. And I think our communities, you can see it. We need to change. We need to realize our stewardship is very important. And on that note, I would like to actually leave, as part of this presentation, leave you with a narration that Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam turned to us and said, "O Muhajirun," he basically was reminding us, it's a dua, and that dua talks about this. It is one dua is from the Sunan of Abu Dawud for the protection from diseases. And the following that I have here on the slide is from the Sunan of Ibn Majah, who related that Abdullah ibn Umar said, the Prophet ﷺ related that there are basically 5 things that you should be careful of, that when they happen, this will happen, that there will be consequences. Immorality, do not cheat weight measures, do not withhold zakah, do not break your covenant. I stressed on that point, the 4th, the stewardship. That is our covenant of the Imana, of which we are stewards, our khalifas, and leaders ruling according to the book of Allah. When we derail from that, we see what's happening today. It is, if this does not send a chilling reminder, I don't know what else will. But this dua from the Prophet, peace be upon him, reminds us. So therefore, consequently, the urgency of preventive measures of human stewardship of earth care with an emotional intelligence. Of course, that's another topic of its own, but emotional intelligence, that which is, some of you know of what it is, but it was reflected by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and it is needed. It is needed in order to fulfill that trust that counterbalances such unsustainable human activity. That includes racism and inequalities prevalent in today's society, and to preserve Earth's other communities, to preserve all communities, including the existence of ourselves. We are destroying Earth. It will destroy us if we try, by the actions we are doing. Therefore, the Prophet, I would also just leave you with one thing that's really important. The Prophet ﷺ said that he said to tend to all relations and keep them moist. In other words, everyone matters. Everything matters, or bonds of kinship will break, and everyone has value and importance. Therefore, one can see this will lead to the building of a steward khalifa. It is an ingredient that's required for stewardship. Everyone matters. And a steward whose actions will be sustainable, and a journey that can reverse outward unsustainable human activity, causing the rise of such zoonotic diseases and other diseases like racism, bigotry, and homogeneity versus diversity, and others. Scholars such as Al-Ghazali, the famous Al-Ghazali, and most of you know of him. If you don't, I highly suggest you read up on his books. And one of them was The Alchemy of Happiness. He related that the one who knows oneself is the one who knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the more you are deluded from knowing yourself and position yourself with hubris, the less you know about God. In other words, to understand oneself first and then influence society by our actions, not control as conquerors, as we're doing right now, is to regain stewardship as a dependent need of Allah. And therefore, we will realize our stewardship when we realize we're dependent of His independence. And accountability will come, and the covenant we will serve of the Imana as stewards of God. So let's remember our stewardship. Let's fulfill the Imana given to us, and with the wonder of the ways Dr. Hussein elaborated with data of what the problem is, the zoonotic diseases. Let's revive our stewardship, and remember the blessings and favors that were given to us. Maintain our dignity and the dignity given to us, and inshallah, be hopeful. And with that, I would like to end this wonderful presentation, and thank you so much for joining us. And I'd like to just quickly talk about the upcoming collaborations. We have an Isna Imana with Mana during Black History Month. It's called, the title is Greening the Hood, Islam, Environmental Justice, and Climate Change in the Inner Cities. Exciting topic. I highly recommend you go to it. Tuesday, February 16th at 8 p.m. We have our speakers, Imam Said Shakir, Lubna Ahmed, and Imam Safed Katovic. And another upcoming ISNA webinars we have are is the Green Ramadan campaign, as I mentioned earlier, aligned with Earth Day. The date and time is to be announced. World Water Day, also the date and time is to be announced. And one other item as general information that we highly recommend the Green Initiatives team is to become a Faithful Climate Action Fellow. We highly encourage it. Some wonderful organizations are spearheading this. And if you would like further information, contact ISNA, or you can, I'm sure from the recording, you can get this flyer. And with that, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Hussein. Thank you, Isna. And thank you, Imana. Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Jazakallah khair. And I would like to open up for any question and answer that any of you may have. We have one point that a solution that Sister mentioned, that aside from food choices, we also need to change our choices and lifestyles. Example, live a simple life, clothing choices, shopping, etc. We basically need a paradigm shift. And that's absolutely true. In other words, we need to learn from this pandemic and not just say, we're going to get over this. We need to realize, why is this happening? Why are we being put back into our homes? And Muslims are part of this. We are not better. We are part of the human race and that message, but we have this amazing message. There's another question, actually, Dr. Hussein, I'd like to ask you is, can you recommend some solutions or practical steps to our audience to alleviate such unsustainable practice that we are currently in, basically in our homes, our businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for that. And thanks for the comments that people had left. So I alluded to some of that and some things that people could do. But ultimately, I think understanding what your personal carbon footprint is in your community and, on the planet, I think is probably one of the most personalized ways, that you can help address this issue as well too. So looking at how much waste do you generate? How many, bags of trash are you throwing out every week or every day? Are you using more single-use recyclable or single-use plastic material, or are you using more recyclable material? Are you composting food, or are you just throwing it away? Composting can actually decrease a lot of food waste that ends up in landfills that ultimately breaks down in an unnatural way, leading to a lot of methane release, which, like we had discussed, can has more of an impact on the greenhouse effects than carbon dioxide even. So looking at some of those smaller things as well too, I think can help a lot and make this issue and problem more manageable than trying to fix the entire world, through summits or declarations. The other thing too, which Isna will be focusing on, the Greening Ramadan campaign. And so there is a lot of food waste that happens during Ramadan as well, especially at iftars and all that before, when we used to have iftars, but large community iftars. And so getting time to reflect on during Ramadan even, and thinking about different ways of how to be green, and how being green is actually a survival mechanism at this point, right? Versus just a life choice or, what's cool or not, what your friends are doing. That we really have to do this because as of right now, based on that Paris Agreement, that the goal to not have the Earth warm more than 2 degrees Celsius, we are currently at between 1.5 and 1.7 degrees. So we are very dangerously close to that 2 degree mark. And if it's not that, the minute we go to 2 degrees, everything's over. It's going to be this progressive and very tumultuous time that will happen, where we're going to see a lot more suffering, a lot more natural disasters, a lot more changes to what we consider normal life. And so if we could, as to the previous sister's comment, that if we can change our behaviors individually, then that eventually becomes community behaviors and eventually becomes nation behaviors, that we can, inshallah, turn this around. So.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I would like to just mention, if anyone has further questions, to put it on the YouTube live chat. And if you're wondering where to put the questions, and I think in the end, stewardship and all the items that Dr. Sam mentioned and the other sister mentioned in the questions and comments are valid. And if we don't, our actions are urgently needed. And I think we are not only, the actions need to come from inside and outside. They need to be not just outward, it needs to question our own positions. Are we comfortable in where we're at? And it's okay to see others suffer, to see racism happen as we see in our country today. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to, Isna's Greening Ramadan campaign, please join it, please participate. It is a way, we'll have a brand new, more challenging rubric this year, inshallah, in order where you can see how green you are and measure and quantify your actions. I think it's a great opportunity. And I know that other organizations are also doing an approach where you can measure not measure perhaps, but see where you are in the greening of your Ramadan, because a lot of waste happens. So if there's any other questions, I don't think we have any more questions. So there's no question. So I will say thank you so much for joining us. It was wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Hussein.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isna. Thank you, everyone. And alhamdulillah, take care, be safe. And with hope, inshallah, we will get over this pandemic. And assalamu alaikum. Thank you. Jazakallah khairan. Is